Good morning, folks, and welcome to the workshop of Armitage Leather. Today, I'm going to be doing a review of the Crimson Hide Arc Bevelers. But I'm going to include a couple of other Crimson Hide tools, namely what they call their creasers. I don't think they're creasers. They can be used as creasers, but I think they are exquisite stitch markers. And if we're using our bevelers properly, we should be matching our bevel to our stitch marker. Now, there's a couple of bits and pieces on the website that Crimson Hide have put, and I'm going to go through all the details, the specifications of the tools, the cost, and then we're going to look at the use. And this is where it comes down to perhaps terminology, translation, and I think that they've got a winning combination here, but they're not quite celebrating it as well as they could on the website. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that, because if we are clever, it's like matching your needles to your thread to your SPI when you're stitching. Matching the distance from the edge of the leather to the bevel makes a huge difference because we have a true edge and a false edge. And I'm going to go through that because I think this is a really good opportunity to look at these two tools together and see them work in conjunction. And there are recommendations on the website of what leather each tool is for. I'm kind of shooting that out of the water a little bit because it's more about the aesthetics sometimes than just saying, well, I've got a 3mm thick piece of leather, I should be using that tool. You can use any tool on any thickness of leather. There are limits. Obviously, if we go up to, I think it's the 4, which is the biggest one, and just glancing over at my list, that's a 2.2mm cut. We're not going to be using that on 1.5mm thick leather. So we've got to come down smaller scale. But if we had a nice chunky bit, and I've got loads and loads of leather here. I've got bridle, I've got shoulder, I've got side, I've even got a bit of chrome in here so we can see it working. But I've got a piece of 3mm shoulder. Technically, we can use any bevel on that, and I'll talk about that as we get to it. And this is where the conjunction of what they call the creases, what I call the stitch markers, really come into their own. It's a true celebration of a union of two different tools to give you the best looking item that you can get. It's kind of cool. I've never had a good think about this, but I think we can push this a little further. So let's have a look at what I'm going to review. It's these. These are the Arc Bevelers. Now, if you've not come across these before, you may be struck by that's an odd shape. And that's certainly something that piqued my curiosity. Why are we taking something that has been around for a very long time? So here's an example. This is a Thomas Dixon beveler. This 1870, 1880, it's been around for a while. And there's a good likelihood there may have been tools similar to this prior to this. It's difficult to find out who invented and when they started using bevelers. But suffice it to say, this is what we expect to see when we see a beveler. And the vast majority of iterations that we're seeing in the shops today or online are very similar to this. This is a huge step away from convention. What's that about? Why? And that's what piqued my interest about them initially. So I started speaking with Shirley about them at Crimson Hides and asked the question, why? And it seems that there's an awful lot of thought gone into this. And I came up with an idea of why I think a tool of this shape could be really useful. started speaking with Sherlyn, and that's exactly what they were aiming for, the same thing. Now, I've had these for a while. You may well have seen the opening the box video. I've got these saying that I'm going to do the review. So I've had these for a few months. And I've had these for a few months intentionally because I wanted as many students as I could to use them. Not with instruction, just basically give them one and see what happens. Because a huge amount of occasions when students are beveling, and I found this particular when I'm teaching box stitching. When we're doing a flat piece, it's not so much of an issue, but when we've got a corner set at 45 degrees and we run a bevel down that, we're holding the tool technically at 45 degrees to both edges. So we're taking off two bits of leather at the same time when we do a box stitch corner. And I'm seeing that one piece of leather is much thicker than the other, which is telling me the tool is not centered. And that's happening an awful lot. So got these, and I ran a box stitching course recently and handed these tools over and said, do your beveling with these tools. And the one distinct thing that comes clear is this tool is so much easier to hold vertical. Whereas if we look at the old conventional tool, it's a really nice tool, but actually we can hold it at a very slight angle and not know we're doing that. It gets worse when we change. So when we're going round a corner, our biomechanics are causing the angle to change, which means we either increase or decrease the bevel. If you've got a really big bit of steel like this, it's almost as if it's acting like a rudder. You can steer it, but more importantly, you can see if that wobble's occurring. And I found when I let people run wild with these, they were keeping them up level more consistently. So I can see the merit of having this large bit of steel, because ultimately it's costing them more money to make. There's more material involved in producing this. And this ability to steer the tool really had an impact on box stitching. So I'm thinking that when I teach box stitching, this is the tool for beveling, because it came out far more consistently than using a standard beveler that we perhaps can change the angle very subtly and very slightly. And we'll look at that. We'll look at the result of varying the angle of the tool when we go to bevel. So, yeah, they look weird. That was the first impression. A little bit disparaging. Sorry, Sherlyn and the guys at Crimson Hide. Yeah, I did look at that and think it was weird. But then again, I said exactly the same about many other tools that have come out, the more contemporary, and this modern revolution of new tools coming out into the market. It did, because it's not that it's weird, it was a huge step away from convention. I also was struck at how small they were. I mean, my big polar bear hands, these get lost. You know, I like a larger tool, but the truth is, when you hold it properly, they sit in there perfectly. This just crowns into the palm so comfortably. The index finger comes down, you can hold it over the top, or you can hold it to the side. I prefer over the top, because then you're pointing at what you're cutting. Little finger can come out, and you can steer it really, really nicely. So actually, even in my big, massive paws, they fit really nicely. You've got an intimate connection with the cutting bit. I'm probably about 20 millimeters, 3/4 of an inch away from the cutting bit. So I feel a very intimate connection with that task. We come for a much bigger tool and we hold it, and I'm a good 3 inches, 75 mil away from that. And some tools are even bigger than this. And I've never had an issue, never noticed that before. But that bringing the hand forward, increasing that intimate connection with the cut, increased consistency. I find everybody's going to be different. Everybody that picks this tool up is going to hold it different, is going to feel differently about it, and is going to use it very slightly differently. But I like it. I like that intimate connection. I feel this is far more of a better position when I'm going around a tight corner. Being disconnected from that cut, the hand is moving an awful lot further to go around that corner. I'm talking about a small corner, 20 mil or something like that. So the hand is travelling, so therefore the body is moving much more. Because it's closer, the hand is moving less, the body's moving less, so therefore you remain more stable. If you like, your centre of gravity remains. You're not doing this big arc because you have a long tool. You're doing a smaller arc because you have a shorter tool. So therefore you become more effective. And we're going to see, we're going to push it. I'm going to make some holes. I'm going to see how tight we can go around a corner with this. Because I did a review of the John Lynn Bevelers. Beautiful tools. If you've not seen that, go and have a look. It's in the list. And I was absolutely staggered at how tight a curve you could bevel with that tool. Should we find out on these? Because it's got to be worth it, hasn't it? And there are occasions where we want to bevel an internal cut. So what is the limit of our internal bevel? Because if we do a rectangle or the like, and we can, if we square the corners, evidently that's going to be an issue because we've got the two bars preventing the cut going all the way. But if we round the corners, we can go round those corners. And it's a question of how tight a corner can we go round. Anyway, I am waffling. I'm quite excited about this. I've got loads set up. It's not going to be a short video. It's not going to be buy this tool is great, like you see many others, and you just see people use them. I'm going to explain all the details about them, how much they are, how I use them, why I like them, and where I think they fit in your toolbox and your skill set, working in conjunction with what they call the creases, what I think should be called the stitch markers, because I think the stitch marker is amazing. I'll tell you why. I don't think I've done a review of those. I'm using that because this is part and parcel, and it may be that that warrants a separate video. But let's get the spec sheet and do the boring bit and get that out of the way. The simple thing, because you watch this 2 or 3 days after I've made it, everything's going to be correct. If you're watching this a year down the line, things could have changed. Go to crimsonhide.com. All the information that I'm going to give you is on that website, and all the current prices are going to be on that website. So let's talk about the tech specs then. So, the Crimson Arc Edge Beveler. That's what they're calling them. There are 5 of them. Now, it's worth highlighting that we've got an awful lot of makers making bevelers. We've got some incredible tools on the market. I would say we've probably got access to some of the best tools we've ever had access to. I know people bang on about the old tools are the best. But when I came into this game, Dixons had got to a point where they weren't even case hardening their irons and the teeth would bend. And you'd be working away, doing a line, only to find that the 7th and 8th holes are all skipped off to one side because your tool's had a knock and it bends. And everybody bangs, oh, Dixons were fantastic, they're fantastic. There were problems with them, okay? Today, the materials that you're using are much, much better. We're getting far more consistency from tools today than perhaps we were in the olden days. So yeah, we can go traditionalist, but there has been a tool revolution. Things have modernised, things have got better, the steel is good, and I am thinking that we are spoilt today because we've got some incredible makers making some wonderful tools, making ours look good, and this is just one of them. So, we'll talk about the design, the step away in a little bit more detail as we start using it. The steel that's been used is a DC53 steel. The handle is ebony, and they look like copper rivets holding it on. So all of a sudden, the materials that are being used, what's not to love? Quality materials, put together beautiful, the fit and finish, there are no gaps between the scales, there are no gaps at the holes where the rivets are. There's a chamfer coming in, again I'll zoom in. Everything about it just works. The fit and finish is absolutely bob on. There's a little bit more to this that I'm going to go into in more detail when I zoom in, about attention to detail on these tools. It's fair to point out that between each maker, the numbers are not consistent. So if we look at a 0 on Crimson Hide, and we look at a 0 on Barry King, and we look at a 0 on Jeremiah Watt, and a 0 on Sawa or Craftshaw or Kiyoshinelli or Tandy, they are all different. There is no consistency in bevelers. SPI on irons, there is. The 3.85mm for 7 SPI, they're fairly consistent to the point of you could probably take a KS blade, an Amy Rourke, a Crimson Hide, make a set of holes, and each iron will fit in the same holes that other irons have made. That's lovely. But bevelers do not transfer. So you might have bought a John Lynn 0, you might have bought a Crimson Hide 0, you might have bought a Palo Santo 0, and they're all very slightly different. What I will say is the closest ones to these is the Palo Santo. They seem to kind of have got a little bit of consistency between them, and if everybody else jumps on board with that, then brilliant. But I think the tools are set up, the tools are made, the list is done, they're going to stay as they are. But that's not an issue as long as you're aware. If you're going to have different sizes, you kind of need to have the same set, the same tools. I've got all the sets here and I can see the difference between them. That sometimes works to my benefit, sometimes it doesn't. Just be aware of that. So just going off the website, 01234. So the 0 has a cutting edge on the inside of here of 0.6mm. The website recommends this tool to be used on 1 to 1.7mm thick leather. The number 1 has a cutting edge of 1mm. It's recommended that you use this on 1.8 to 2.4mm leather. The number 2 is 1.4mm cutting edge in here. And you can go onto my website, armitageleather.com. You can go to the shop and the downloads on there, and you can download the updated review sheet with all the tech specs on there and my thoughts and feelings. And you've got all the other bevelers on there as well, all the videos. It's entirely up to you. But this is the number 2. This will cut 1.4mm internal, and it's recommended for 2.5 to 2.9mm thick leather. The number 3 has an internal cutting edge of 1.8 and will cut, or is recommended for 3 to 3.9mm thick leather. And the number 4 has an internal cut of 2.2mm and is recommended for 4mm thick and above. Now that's the bit I'm going to shoot out the water, because we can swap, chop and change. That recommendation is sometimes down to aesthetics. If you don't know and you follow that recommendation, you will not go wrong at all. It's a good recommendation and it's a very sound footing from which to start. But actually, when you get an understanding of how these work, especially if you use the beveler in conjunction with your stitch line, then you can make different things happen. And I'm going to talk about that when we get to the leather bit and we see how it works. The cost. So all of these, they're all the same cost, are 100 Singapore dollars each. That's without the sharpening set. And they're only $105 with the sharpening set. $5. That's pennies. That's dollars. Singapore dollars. So to equate that, if you're in the UK, GBP, without the sharpening, it's 58.60. With the sharpening, there's 61.50. USD, without the sharpening kit, it's 73.50. With the sharpening kit, $77. So anybody else, if I've not picked your currency, just Google 100 or 105 Singapore dollars for your local currency to see what they are. I appreciate, to some people, that's a lot of money. Don't have the budget for it, I understand. But if you want to do a good job, you need a good tool. And these are not the most expensive tools on the market by any stretch of the imagination. I think they're a really good midpoint price range. They're not overly expensive, they're not cheap, but they're not going to break the bank. But for the quality that you're getting and the effectiveness of them, it's going to make your work look good. So you can buy a cheap tool. Can't afford that, I'm going to buy a tool for 20 quid. So you buy a tool for 20 quid and it chews your leather up. But you've got a piece of leather that's your item and it's just chewed the edge up. So now you can't sell it because you've ruined the edge, so you've got to replace it. So all of a sudden there's a cost implication. If you use the right tool that is effective, that cost implication is removed because you are achieving first time. You're not having to go back and fix a problem. So yes, we can achieve with cheaper tools, by all means, but sometimes having the right tool for the job in the long term is more cost effective, if that makes sense. It's like having a really good cutting board. So we've got an uneven cutting board, it's moving round, the rule twists because it's on a high point, we're constantly adjusting. The amount of money that we've wasted on materials throwing away because we've been fighting against the problem, we could have spent that money at the outset on a cutting board. We've saved that or spent the money on a decent board, but from that point we've saved money and time. We're achieving much quicker. And if we can achieve better with a good tool, we progress better. I digress a little bit. But the tech specs, that's pretty much it. The steel, the wood, the pins. Let's talk in a little bit more detail about this attention to detail that some manufacturers miss out on. For that, we've got to zoom in a little bit. And I was really, really impressed with this. So coming in a little bit closer, I'm going to move the others out of the way. I'm going to start off with a 0. Now the 0 will give us an internal cut of 0.6 millimeters. So I've got the calipers here. And this is 1.7. So that's, call it 1.6 for argument's sake. That's 0.5 millimeter of steel either side. When we get a thin piece of leather, that 0.5 millimeter of steel isn't going to encroach beyond the thickness of the leather. It's not going to hit the board. So if I get the number 4 and we do that, we can see that that's actually fouling. It's hitting the board, so it's not effectively cutting. They have thinned down the material that they've used for each size. It's not one piece, because if we look at the number 4, we can see a completely different thickness. And it's the same for every one. Every one of these is a piece of stock specifically to match the size of the cut. I thought that was awesome. A lot of people would say, well, we got 4 of them, we'll get 2 pieces of stock, we'll make the small 3 out of the thin piece, we'll make the big 3 out of the thick piece. They haven't. So the number 1, 2.3. So that's an internal cut of 1 millimeter. So that's 1.3 divided by 2, so it's 0.65 or something like that. So this is the number 2. This is just under 3 mil, so that's 1.4, again 0.75. steel either side. That's recommended for 2.5 to 3 mil. So if I get some 3 mil, we pop it on there. More importantly, we look at the side. There is loads of space. Absolutely loads of space. So we get a really effective cut every single time. The number 3, which has an internal of 1.8, this turns out to be 2.3. So incrementally, they come up. The number 4, which has an internal cut of 2.2, this is 3.6. I really like that. So we've got a bit of 4 mil here. This is what the number 4 is recommended for. We pop that on there. That fits the dream. We look at the side, and again, but it's when we start cutting that actually we go down a lot lower. So we do that. Don't bring it up so high so it comes out of focus. We've still got loads of space. So the recommendations that they give you on the website are good recommendations. I'm going to step away from those recommendations a little bit and explain why. Let's look at the effectiveness. Are they any good? Now I've had these for a while, so we'll put them back in order. So this is 1.5mm thick shoulder. This is Lamport. We'll get the 0. So the recommendation is 1 to 1.7. So we're well within that. And we can run that down. In fact, let's do the back first, because the back is the roughest. And we can see there that we've just got feathers coming off. And we'll look at that from the overhead. And again, feathers coming off. But when we turn it over and we do the grain side, which is the strongest and the better side, look at that. Off in one piece. Beautiful. It just runs a dream. The one thing that I really like about this is as you go for the angle in holding it, you can see that tool sit at 45 degrees. And as you push down, it's really easy to maintain that angle. We're not varying it. Now I could vary the angle on this, but because it's quite fine, we're not really going to see the impact. So I'm going to wait until we get to a larger piece of leather and a heavier beveler so we can see the impact clearer. It will be visible, but the camera might not pick it up because we are only taking a feather off. So for light leathers, fine leathers, let's just, well, we've got a piece of chrome side here. Let's do the back. So this is chrome side. I do not suspect it's going to bevel the back well, because it's fluffy. And again, same sort of thing, we got that fluff coming off. But let's have a look at the face or the grain side and see how that looks. Probably not holding the leather down firm enough, because like I say, this is side and I've got some fluff under there, which doesn't help, Nige. It's achievable. We can bevel chrome. We can bevel softer leather. Not a leather I use an awful lot of here in the workshop, but it will work on that. It will work with most things. But if you're using something like a 1mm for a watch strap, this is what you want. Let's go up to the number 2. Oh, no, actually the number 1, because it goes from 0. So here I've got a bit of 2.2mm thick russet. We'll go for the fluffy side first. We've got the number 1. Look at that. Exquisite. Exactly the same again. Beautiful. That we can round, and we're going to talk about using different sizes on different occasions. Let's go for the number 2. 3mm. So this is a bit of naked lamport. It's finished, it's not russet, but it's the colour. And again, absolutely exquisite. I'm going to stick with the same leather, go for a number 3. Still 2mm thick leather. Oh, absolutely beautiful. And the angle just sails a dream. Look at that. And let's go for a number 4. And for that, we've got a lovely bit of 4mm bridle. Big heavy leather. And it just eats it up. Eats it up an absolute dream. So this is following Crimson Hide's website's recommendations. And again, that will work. It really will. They are absolutely beautiful. You can stop watching if you want. I've said everything you need to know to make your mind up about, are these tools for you? Do you want them in your arsenal? Or if you're just curious, what do they work like? What do they look like? What do they feel like? You've got an idea. I like them. That's just one person's opinion. That's all you're watching here is my opinion, but you're seeing the effectiveness of them as well. You can follow the recommendations from the website. You will not go wrong. Simple as that. But I'm going to step away from those recommendations just a little, because I think, it's not about think, I know that we can look at our stitch line in an awful lot more detail, and we can use them in conjunction with what they call their creases. So if I just slide these out the way, these are the creases. So they go from 2 to 2.5 to 3, 3.5, 4, 4.55. I've got to put the 4 in space because it gets used so much in this workshop. I've rubbed the paint off so I can't see which one it is. And to be fair, the other ones are starting to go as well. So I might have to find a way of colour coding them to make sure I don't pick up the wrong one. Let's pick the 4. Because when I'm teaching people here in the workshop, I've got certain recommendations. A 4mm stitch line. A 7 SPI iron. That's the most forgiving combination. And a number 1 bevel. So if you are on a budget, my recommendation to you, and you're only buying limiting tools, 3.85mm 7 SPI. Number 4 stitch line, and a number 1 beveler. You can do an incredible amount with that. And it is a very, very forgiving combination to start with. You could add to it as time allows. But that's a whole other topic. But what do I mean by that? If we have a look, so if I just grab, in fact, let's do it with a russet, because it might be a little clearer. And we'll just nibble that edge off. This is what we usually do to start. In the past it was dividers. But when we're doing a complex build and we've got multiple pieces, we may use our dividers for different jobs. We also may not set our dividers or may not have the best of dividers and they move. We do a 4mm, or what we believe is a 4mm stitch line on one piece of leather. It may actually be 3.8 or 4.2. And then we go and adjust the tool, or the tool moves, or it flexes, and we do another stitch line on another piece of leather, and actually we're adding a different stitch line. So when we put our 2 pieces of leather and we're expecting to be flat at the top, they're not. They're offset, because we've got 3.8 on this side and 4.2 on this side, and it's 0.4mm out, which means that's got to be dealt with. So having a tool that's fixed at 4mm means when you pick it up, Irrelevant of where you use it, it is always going to be 4mm. So they are selling these as creases, whereas I am saying the stitch markers. Yes, you can use them as creases, but ultimately when you do that, it does not matter how many times you do that, that is always going to be 4mm. How many different pieces of leather or where you do it, it is always going to be 4mm. So that's what we would do normally. I'm just going to make this really, really heavy so you can see it a little clearer. We would then take our iron and we would run a line down. And this is where our stitching sits. So what I'm doing here is straddling that line. I'm not putting the tool against the line, because if I put the tool against the line, when I stitch, I will still see that line. So I'm straddling the line, so when I stitch, I can't see it. And that's usually what we do. We stitch it to another piece of leather, that's our item, and it works. And that's normally what we do. So if we went to the recommendation of the number 1, which is 1.8 to 2.5, and this is 2.2, we'd nail it. That looks awesome. And in fact, I'm regretting that decision because you can't see the false edge. So I'm going to do that again on this piece of leather. So find my number 4 and do a stitch line. We can see it clearer. Add a few holes, exactly as we would normally. Go for the number 1 and we should see this much clearer on camera. And there we go. We can now see a number of edges. We can see our true edge, which is the edge of the leather that we've cut with a knife. But now we see a false edge. This is where the surface of the grain leather has been cut in to allow for the bevel to exist. And when we dress that edge up, let's say it's in black, we make the edge of the leather look much closer to our stitching than it was. Now, if we follow the recommendations, that looks good. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if we were to do something like this, because we have perhaps stitched 2 or 3 pieces of leather together, and we go, well, now all of a sudden this is 6 or 8mm thick, we're going to go for a number 4. So we can run the number 4 down, and we find that our false edge now is so much closer to our stitching. We have an awful lot more leather between the false edge and the true edge of the leather. Whereas here we have far less, so it's subtle. This may give us a really nice rounded edge and a more tactile piece, but it actually spoils our stitching. Now there's nothing wrong with doing this, but if we are going to do this, what perhaps would be better, and if I just continue that down a little further, is we just get a piece of leather, we put our bevel, and perhaps we'll say, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to move our stitch line in to 5mm. And then we'll do our holes set to the 5mm stitch line. This is moving our stitching over another millimetre, increasing the distance from the stitching and the false edge. But if we go straight to a 5mm edge, or a 5mm line, we can look at that and go, well, that's far too far in from the edge. But actually, we can, and I've got it quite zoomed in, so I'm moving everything around, get quite a lot of space in here. What if we want a purse crease? So we can use a combination of lines and a combination of bevels to get what we want. And we can say, well, let's start off with a 5mm stitch line, because we know we'll get away with that. We're not making our holes yet, we're just doing a line. We know we can go for a number 4 bevel, but that's going to bring our false edge in, reducing the amount of space that we might want for a purse crease. In an ideal world, we'd perhaps want our purse crease to sit between our false edge and our stitching. So if we went for something like a number 1 or even a 0, so if we went for a number 1 and we have a quick look and see how much space does that take off, and that takes off about 1 millimetre. So we've got 5 millimetres. We're losing 1 millimetre with the bevel, we've got 4 left. So if we went for a 2 millimetre, we have a look at that and we think, well, actually, no, we want it 3 millimetres. There we go. So now we have our purse crease. They look a little offset, but as soon as we add our bevel, they look balanced. We can then add our stitch line, and it can be any combination that you want. Then we've got our stitching here. We've got a beautiful bevel, it's going to work. We've got a beautiful purse crease, it's going to work. And we've got our stitch line. We can balance it and we can have a look at that and go, do you know, that number 3 is really nice, but actually I think a 2.5 would look far, far better. That looks like it's running down the middle. We can do it quite heavy so we can see it. We can just run our finger down there again. All of a sudden, we've got a bevel, a purse crease and a stitch line that match. So we can use these in conjunction with these and this to elevate our item. And I think that is perhaps a better reason to call these stitch markers and a good opportunity to step away from the recommended number for the thickness of the leather and go for matching our bevel to our stitch line. Now again, if you went for a number 4 stitch line and you went for your number 1 bevel, it would look fantastic. But if you do that on a heavy, thick piece of leather and go up in size, it can run the risk of looking a little odd. So we just throw that number 4 back down there again, just to there. We can see that that's hiding our purse crease almost. We're losing it. It's a little bit too much. We could bring everything in a little further. That's just a very, very brief, without going into it being a full-on lesson of how to mark the edge of your leather and what tools to use. It's looking at the versatility of the tool that they've got. We've had a look at the angle of this tool, the ability, and in fact that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought it up, thank you. Let's have a look at what happens to a bevel when we vary. So let's perhaps go for a number 2. A big problem, it's not so much of an issue when you're on the flat, but certainly when you are trying to bevel something that is not flat, and it does happen because we make something, we put it together and we decide it needs beveling after, and we have an inconsistent surface. We can run the risk of adjusting our bevel. So if I start off at 45 and then lean out to make it flat and then lean up, we can see we have 2 variations from what we want. This is what we want, this is not enough, this is too much. And we can perhaps hide that on a belt or something. And what tends to happen is as we go down, we vary it as we go, and it becomes a little bit subtle. Or we see a high point and we think, well, we'll go down that again, and we take off a bit more. We get an inconsistent edge. The smoother and more consistent we can make that cut, because ultimately it is a knife and it is a cut. The smoother and more consistent we can make that cut, the more consistent our edge will dress up. The more inconsistent that is, the quicker it will let our item down. With the more elongated and narrower tools, if you are adept, it's unlikely, but it's when I'm teaching students that perhaps don't necessarily have the full understanding of how things are working, we get that variation. I have noticed that is removed because of this, and that's what I'm talking about when I say about using it like a paddle. We can set it on its path, look at the size of the tool, because I'm looking at the side of this tool. I'm over here, I'm up here looking at this, and I can see that angle is sitting there beautiful all the way down. Should always do the back first, but nonetheless, and this is helping me keep that tool consistent throughout, because if it moves, it's very, very obvious. That's a huge boon, especially, like I say, if you're coming off the board and you're trying to do it freehand on a non-consistent surface. It's kind of, I like it. It's won me over. It really has. If you watch any of the reviews and you see me looking at ugly tools, and I, for a long time, call the KS blade the ugly sisters of the iron world, but they do the job so effectively. Same as the KS blade, same as these bevelers. Yes, they look different because they've been made intentionally. They're not just trying to go, we're different, look at this, have these because they're unique. They're saying, we've thought about this. We're going to give you a greater ability to gain more consistency over a long run, because you can see this angle so much clearer. And it fits in the hand. Stick that little finger out for consistency, and it's just not going to move. It's the same as looking at my cutting techniques. Worked in conjunction with the stitch markers and the creases, you can catalogue early, because you will practice, you'll get a test piece and go, I want a purse crease, I want a stitch line, what is my best stitch line if I want to add a purse crease? And you can do all of that, and then when you go to your item, you go, well, that tool matches that tool matches that tool, and you are going to be achieving a much neater looking edge and dressing than perhaps just going, well, I've got a 4, I'm going to use a 4. That's absolutely fine. If you want to use a 4, we might have to come into a 6 or a 7mm stitch line. That sounds like a lot, but if you get the balance right, it will work. I've kind of digressed into a lesson here. I think you get the idea. They've won me over. I like them. You have to make your own mind up. You can't take my word for it. You've had a good understanding of how they work and what they do. You've had a good insight into they are sharp, they are smooth, they are consistent, they work. It's up to you now. I've given you a bunch of information. I like them. I think if you bought them, you would not be disappointed at all. I think if you bought them in conjunction with the stitch markers, you would see the true benefit of the tools. If you're already subscribed, if you've got a full set of Palo Santos and go, Nige, they're great, they're fantastic, I see everything that you're saying, but I've already got these tools and I'm not going to buy another set because I can't afford it, fine. Okay? But consider the stitch markers with the Palo Santos or with the Barry King. They're going to do the same job the same way. If you are on the market for a beveler, you'd be hard pushed to find something better. There are a number of manufacturers out there today that are top of the Christmas tree. Quite simply, they are producing fantastic tools, and Crimson Hide are one of them. And there's thought that's gone into them. That's what impresses me. They've had a ponder about this, and they've really gone into detail in the design. Why are we doing this? Let's look at the thickness of the material. Let's look at the angle of the hand. Let's look at how the tool approaches the leather. Because the way the hand is holding the tool, it causes the hand to sit low, which keeps the tool low. How many times have we seen tools, especially the dogleg ones, where you've got to hold them really high? And actually, when you find you've got such a short bit at the tip of the tool, it actually digs in the leather because of it. So you're finding this balance. With these, you're starting low, and it just finds it. It just finds it an absolute dream because it puts the hand at a really good angle. It's moving that finger, and the whole process is so much more intimate to the hand. Absolutely loving it. That's enough of that. You get the idea. I'm just going to beat you over the head by going over and over and over again. Let's push the limit. Let's see if we can find something they can't do. So let's start off with a very simple test. Let's just cut a corner off a piece of leather. No sanding or anything like that. What are we going to pick? Let's pick a number 1. Let's find out how it copes, fits in the hand, nice and intimate, turn the leather, even on the fluffy bit. It goes around that corner. I appreciate it's a larger corner. And there we go. That is beautiful. How about a hole? Let's start off with 10mm. We've got the number 1. I think it might be a bit big, but let's find out. That angle maintains. It's not too big at all. Look at that. There we go. Let's do the outside. I wouldn't necessarily choose a number 2 for this job, but we've got a number 1 and a 0. Look at that. Let's do that again. Oh, we've got fluffy bits. I tell you what, let's leave the fluffy bits. So that was a number 2. Or was it a number 1? I'm not entirely sure now. So we've got all those fluffy bits. Fluffy bit's gone. I think it was probably a number 1. I'm using this twice. Look at that. Now, I think sense would dictate I'd go for a 0. So let's try the 0. Really easy to hold the tool at the correct angle. Also, a little bit of a fluffy bit there. There we go. Do exactly the same again. That is stunning. Look at that. Right, so you can bevel a 10mm hole. My question is, can you bevel a 5mm hole? And the reason being, we may want to bevel a slot. So this is a 25mm slot, 5mm wide. The 0 is probably the only one I'd go for on this. Shall we find out? And it is doing the usual thing of fluffy bits on the back because the fibres, but however, how does it cope on the front? I'll just go around the other way for comfort. Make sure that doesn't end up under the leather. There we go. That's a 25mm long slot, 5mm wide, and that bevels that a dream. So we can do a 5mm hole because that's what's at the end of this slot, 5mm. That's ridiculous. That's number one. That's the 0. I wonder, let's push it a little further. Let's go for this. This leather's a little thicker, but I think the back is nicer. So let's go for a number 1. We're going up. It's not something that I would necessarily go to because I think it's a little large, but if we want the option, let's find out if we've got the option. Will a number 1 go around a 5mm hole? And it looks like it will. And there we go. And that actually came off in one piece. Let's do the nice side. That's ridiculous. This is not necessarily what you'd use the tool for. I mean, to be fair, there are companies that for years have created what we call bisonet tools for this very purpose, going round incredibly tight corners. So we'd have a set of bevelers, and then we'd have to have a set of bisonet bevelers, so we can go round corners like this. This set of tools will do the whole job. That is ridiculous. If you've got a slot on a pancake sheath and you want to dress it and make it gorgeous, all day long you can, and we can go down, it seems, as far as 5mm. Folks, lots of waffle. The short version is you've got to try it. If you're intending to come to the workshop, they're here in the workshop and you can try them and see what you think. As you can try all the other tools that I've got. Quite a selection. All the tools that you see in all the videos, they're all here. And then you can make your own mind up. But I like them. I think they're a win. They look weird on the rack. That's the only thing. So you've got to have a little bit of a different shape thing going on the rack. But they do work. But the one thing that really sold me on these is I gave them to both experienced and complete beginner leather workers and said, run that down the end. And they all achieved. And the balance when we're looking at, I mean, the box stitching course was for advanced leather workers. But even they struggle when doing that bevel. They didn't vary. They kept the consistency because the size of this steel, paddle, rudder, whatever you want to term it, it assisted visually with keeping it at the right angle. And even with the complete beginners, they look at it and go, oh, well, I've got to keep that at 45 degrees and run that down, and it worked. So it's a win. I hope this little bit of an insight into the tool has been useful to you. If there are any tools that you would like me to review, have a chat with the manufacturer, have them send me the tools, and I will do it all day long, no problem whatsoever. If we can get one catalogue of all the tools in one place, which is great, but the issue is you're only getting one person's opinion. An interesting question came up during these reviews. Somebody sent me an email, says, you don't say anything bad about the tools that you review. No, I don't review bad tools. I have been sent a number of tools over the years saying, will you review these? And I have said, so a prime example, somebody sent me a bunch of knives and said, will you review these? And I said, well, the first thing that I'm going to have to do is sharpen them because they're not sharp. The grind and the bevels are inconsistent. So if I do, then I'm going to have to tell people this is what I'm going to have to do first. And that's going to put people off because not everybody has that skill set. So if you want to address that, so the tool that you're shipping out to the customer is fit for purpose out of the box, then I'm happy to do so. So yeah, I don't just grab a tool and say, this is great, this is bad. If I do get a tool that I think is substandard, I'm not going to do a review of that. I'm not going to say how bad it is. I'm going to go back to the manufacturer and say, this is not what you want to be selling. You need to fix it. And they fix it. It does work. All of a sudden, it's a positive review. So if you are sitting there thinking, well, Nigel says nice things about tools, it's because that goes on in the background. You don't see that. You don't hear about it, but it happens. The Arc bevelers from Crimson Hides are a win if you get one or a set with or without the sharpening. The sharpening. Got a separate box. That's why I keep on forgetting about them, because they sent me them separately. And I'm not, to be fair, these have been used by students. I've not even opened this lot yet. I suspect it's going to be very much of a muchness, being a rod and emery cloth. But shall we find out? There we go. Look at that. In here, oh, that is absolutely awesome. We've got a rod for each size. So that's your number 4. There's the number 1, number 2, number 3 and 0. And the rod corresponds. That is absolutely... And then we've got the... Oh, no. No. Oh, that's ridiculous. Right, I'm going to tell you what the blue bit is in a minute. That is absolutely ridiculous. And then we got a bunch of paper. Oh, they've just gone up in my estimation. You're going to love this. You are going to love this, because I love it. But you can see the bar and you can see the blue bit. Can you guess what the blue bit's for? Can you guess what the blue bit's for from my excitement? And we've got, what have we got? Oh, we've got loads of it. Oh, this is lovely. Oh, that's nice. So what have we got? 15. They're all the same. Yeah, so we got 15 micron. So a whole bunch of them. Right, so let's pick a number 3. Wicked. This is brilliant. So, which one's the number 3? There we go. So we have our bar, over which we can put our 15 micron paper. Press, because that bar matches the curve of the tool at the back, and as we draw down, that polishes up. And you can see, well, I certainly can, that we have complete coverage over the full arc of that curve, because we are leaving material on the paper consistently. There's no gaps. If there's a gap, then it doesn't quite fit. Then we've got this, and what I suspect this is for is we would get a piece of this, we would wrap that round there, and then we can take our bevel off the inside. On some videos, it might be on the channel to be fair, but you see me using a string strop for this. But here we can put this inside and we can take that bevel off, because it doesn't matter how much work we do here, we can always end up with a slight bevel on the inside of the tool, and that's very difficult to get off. What you've seen me do in the past is get a string, rub some oil, and then pull that on the inside to get the string to match, and you're doing like a string strop. That is to get rid of the burr on the inside of the tool. No other company that I've come across has considered how to do that. And Crimson Hide will give you a little tool that fits in here, that you can take it off from the inside. That's genius. I love that. I've only just discovered that because I've only just opened that packet. So you've had my excitement. I think that's genius. For an extra $5, you're getting micron paper, a bar, and the little rod to do the inside of the cut. Fantastic. I'm going to stop talking because I've said so much. We've had a bit of fun. I've had a load of fun. I hope you've enjoyed the video. A little bit off script, but there you go. Crimson hide, top effort. Seriously, top effort. Love the combination of these bevelers with the stitch markers. They just make the stitching look really cool. You see me using the purse creases, and it's that combination and that system that I will work out beforehand rather than make it fit after. It happens first. Am I doing a purse crease? Yes, I am. Then I've got to match the purse crease to the bevel, or the bevel to the purse crease, and then set my stitching in to match that on the other side. Get that combination right, because how many times do we see something that looks gorgeous stitching and we've got that purse crease touching the stitching or touching the bevel? Let's get a balance, get it right in the middle where it's supposed to be, and get it looking gorgeous. These tools will help you achieve that all day long. I'm done. I'm going. Go and have a cup of tea, have a calm down. I'm going to sit in a dark room for 5 minutes. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.